Hi, and welcome to my channel, Laura's Library Card. It is time for my July wrap-up. I'm going to try to wrap this up pretty quickly because I am losing my light, but let's just jump right in. So July was a great month for me. I finished 12 books. There have been a couple books, especially sort of over this summer, that I have started and then DNF for now. If that is a video you might be interested in hearing about, let me know down in the comments. But I finished in July 12 books. Did I say June wrap up? Whatever. I finished 12 books in July. This is my July wrap up. The first book that I finished in July was a nonfiction book I listened to on audio. This is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory. This is by Caitlin Doughty. She reads her own she's her own narrator for this book, which I really enjoyed. I like that element. And I enjoyed this book. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it because it's about death and the death industry. I just kind of was curious, but it was good. It was interesting. And we took, I really kind of took away from it some ideas about the death industry and sort of how America has changed over time with our relationship to death. And there were some amusing anecdotes. I think that the author did a nice job kind of balancing some wild stories with her opinions still, and I thought the book was interesting and it was pretty short. I don't really want to give a rating for nonfiction because this was like kind of a memoir, but you know, I thought it had some strong messages about what Caitlin thought about how people view death in the modern age, especially in America. So I thought it was kind of interesting. The next book that I finished in July was The Women in Black. This is by Madeleine St. John. It's from the early 90s. This was one of my book club picks. I did not enjoy this book. I read the ebook because it's older and therefore I just couldn't really get a hold of it any other way. And it takes place in like Sydney in the 1950s, where the main characters are all women who work at this sort of upscale department store, and they all have uniforms that are black frocks, and so that's why it's The Women in Black. We follow sort of 4 or 5 of their various stories, but it's really just like a snapshot into their lives over the course of sort of like a holiday season. I think like one of the girls is hired essentially for the holiday, the rush between not Christmas and New Year's. It's sort of like almost from Thanksgiving to New Year's, though I don't think there was Thanksgiving in this book because it takes place in Australia. And I was just bored. I just like didn't really care about the characters. I didn't feel like we spent enough time on each of them to grow to care about them. There was like weird like marital issues. I just did not really enjoy this, and only two the one of the person who's always the opposite to me, of course, liked it, and she and I were the only ones who finished it. The other 2 or 3 people didn't even finish the book. So I forced myself to get through it just because it was so short and because it was a book club book, but I should have DNF'd it because it just wasn't for me. And it was like the back of the book says it was so like a comic masterpiece, and I was like, I mean, maybe in 1993 when this came out, but, you know, and it was also set in the 50s and written in like, you know, circa 1993-ish. And so I felt that there was some misogynistic stuff going on that was not my favorite. So I only gave The Women in Black 2 stars. Wasn't for me. The next book that I finished in July was also an audiobook, which was Fixer Up by Tessa Bailey. This is the first book in the Hot and Hammered series, and we follow Georgie and Travis. Georgie is the youngest child in, I mean, she's not a child, she's like 20 something, but she's the youngest of this generation in her family, and her family all treats her as very like immature. She's the baby. They don't give her very much responsibility. They just don't like, you know, they still view her as that a kid. So she wants to fake date with Travis, who is this like famous baseball star who got an injury before the start of the book, and so he is now kind of like his sports career is over, and he's kind of back in his hometown. He views himself as a failure. It doesn't really make any sense to me why she thought that people would view her as respectable and responsible and older and less immature for her like to be dating this guy who was this known player. So that premise just like literally didn't make sense to me, but I kind of like fake dating, so I was kind of like, all right, cool. I also don't care about baseball, but that was barely really an element in this book. And also, same thing. His like part that he got out of the fake dating was that having a steady girlfriend from like a respectable home would look good for him to get a potential job. And I thought to myself, why would the job care who he was dating? I mean, like, I guess maybe they have to like keep, you know, his image in mind. It just felt like a really weak premise. And I don't know, it was definitely smoking hot. I didn't super love the like power dynamics between them in bed, but I really felt that their like relationship was okay out of bed. I enjoyed the whole thing while I was reading it, but then kind of later was like less thrilled with it afterwards. I saw someone else pointed out on the internet that was like his nickname for her is baby girl, and yet she's the one who's like, nobody treats me seriously. And he's like, I know, baby girl. And I'm just like, that's the nickname you would go with right after she tells you that. And I don't know, they were just like, I did not buy it that he like fell for her really kind of afterwards. In the moment, I was really enjoying the book, but later I was like, we didn't really get to see that much of a development of his feelings. And she had a crush on him for her entire life. So this was her like childhood, like friends to lovers. It's also, I think, brother's best friend scenario. And those are just not tropes I super love. So at the time, I did enjoy it. Super steamy. Gave it like 3.5 stars at the time. Now with a little reflection, I'm thinking it's probably closer to like a 2.7 for me personally. But I am intrigued by Tessa Bailey, and I am starting It Happened One Summer for August. So that was the third book I finished in July. Next book I finished in July was Him by Sarina Bowen and Elle Kennedy. This is the first book in the series Him. We follow Wes and Jamie. They are also childhood friends to lovers because this is a male-male romance. They both grew up loving hockey, and they met at this like hockey summer camp where kids can go and learn how to play hockey and learn the rules, blah, 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 blah. And the one, Wes, has always known he was, or not even always known he was gay, but has known he's gay for a very long time. He's had a crush on Jamie for years and years. And 4 or 5 years ago, like in their last year at the camp when they were 17 or 18, an incident happens where they basically just fool around, and Wes feels like that just like ruined their friendship. And so most of this book is sort of, it's not a second chance because they weren't together before, but like here we are a few years later, and they both are going back to this camp as counselors and starting to kind of like explore what went wrong in their friendship, and maybe this is more than a friendship. I have read a couple other books by Sarina Bowen and Elle Kennedy. This duo, I feel like they're smoking. I love the emotional development that is on page. I don't really care about the sports part, but like it was there just enough for it to be believable. I thought Jamie in particular was a great character. He was really fun, and he was like super laid back. He had a great family element. So I enjoyed this, and I liked that it was a secret relationship kind of happening. I'm definitely interested enough to continue reading the series, and I would rate this like a 3.75 stars. The next book that I finished in July was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I listened to this on audio. It is narrated by the author, and I read this for one of my real life book clubs. And this was very interesting. It is a nonfiction, partial memoir that is discussing domestic abuse in LGBT relationships, more specifically in a lesbian relationship that Carmen was in her past. And I could tell that a lot of this book was like healing and processing and just kind of like working through her own history. And I thought that was a very interesting element, and it was not, I don't think it was like meant in any way to like be titillating, but like I could feel the tension laced throughout. I thought the writing was very intriguing and it pulled me along, and it was very beautiful. I don't want to say premise, but like this element that is being used throughout the whole book is this dream house, and she's talking about this period in her life, sort of relating it to the house that they were sharing, for part of this relationship. And then she's kind of comparing that as a metaphor in a bunch of other scenarios. And I thought that was very interesting. At first it got a little repetitive, and I was not a huge fan at the start, but I grew to enjoy the linking of the dream house and the situation that she was in to these, a lot of times, like, I don't want to say cliches, but like she was like as a horror movie or as a Christmas scene, and she would like then kind of tell a story or phrase what lesson she learned from that element, you know, in that section. I don't think I'm doing a very good job describing this, but I really enjoyed listening to, not enjoyed, but I found it very beautiful to listen to this, and I feel like it was an important story to tell, because I think that she, as the author points out multiple times, domestic abuse and violence between LGBT members of the community is not talked about as much, or thought of for a very long time to be not as like real as heteronormative relationships. So I feel like it was a very important book, and again, I don't really know that I can like rate this memoir nonfiction, but I definitely feel like people should try it out and check it out, because it's an important story that I thought was done very well. Those were all the books that I finished before the Tarot Readathon, and I participated in the Tarot Readathon in July. I did a wrap-up video, which I will link up in the cards and down in the description, where I kind of gave a full, complete thoughts and feelings wrap-up of all the books, of the 6 books that I read during the Tarot Readathon. So I will very briefly list what they were and what my rating was, and if I have like a very short, yeah, right, short thing to say about them, then I might pop in with something about that. But otherwise, if you want to hear anything about these titles in more detail, I really urge you to go and check out my Tarot Readathon wrap-up video. So what did I read for the Tarot Readathon? The first book I read was Wayward Son by Rainbow Rowell. This is the second book in the Simon Snow series. Listen to this on audiobook. This was my only reread for the month. And this was a continuation of the Simon Snow story that we got started in Carry On. And this is just like a great American road trip adventure for these young British, English, like wizards, witches. And it is a fun adventure, but like, it definitely felt like a middle book. There was a lot of plot and not a lot of like character growth and development. But you know, I enjoyed it, and it was a reread, and I gave it 4 stars. And then the next book that I finished in the Tarot Readathon was In Deeper Waters by F.T. Lukens. This is a YA adventure with strong romance elements. We follow a prince and a merman, and sort of there's like political intrigue, it's fantasy, there's magic. It was also very good and very interesting. I wanted a little bit more out of that world, but I really enjoyed the writing style, and it was fun. It was very fast paced and like pulled me forward. So I gave that 4 stars. The next book I finished for the Tarot Readathon was If She Says Yes by Tasha L. Harrison. This is a age gap romance where he is interested in his best friend's mother. So there's, you know, she's 55 and he is 32, and it's sort of a whirlwind wedding weekend where his best friend's getting married, and he like helps take care of the groom's mom. And it's kind of, I had some frustrations with that. You can check that out in the video, but ultimately I just kind of wanted a little bit more from that story. It didn't feel like they kind of resolved one of the biggest areas of tension. I didn't buy that they like fell in love over this weekend, so I was just kind of like let down by the end of it, but it was steamy, and I ultimately went with like a 2.5 star for that book. The next book I finished in the Tarot Readathon was No Good Tea Goes Unpunished. This is by Bree Baker and is the second book in the Seaside Cafe mystery series. And so this was a cozy mystery, which I have a little bit of experience with before, but not very much. So we follow Everly. She is a cafe owner slash sweet tea maker, inventor, concoctor, and there is a murder in like chapter 1, and so she is going to be all plucky and try to solve it, and that's what's happening over the course of this book. So she kind of, there's definitely a romance brewing between her and this swoon-worthy, you know, detective guy, but there's also a lot of subplots happening throughout this book, and I just don't know that cozy mysteries are really my thing. I enjoyed the book well enough, but I also was just kind of like underwhelmed. So for me personally, my rating is like only like a 2.5, middle of the road, but I think that structurally as a book, it probably deserves like a 4 star, and I feel like the ratings on Goodreads are warranted. The next book that I finished for the Tarot Readathon was Down to Ash. This is by Melissa Blue. It is the second book in the Dirty Sexy Geeks series. We follow Victor and Ashley, He is her brother's best friend. He is a bomb tech veteran, and he basically has, like, Victor has always loved Ash, even though she was, the younger sister of his best friend and therefore off limits. And so this whole book is them like giving into their lusts and then kind of dealing with the repercussions with their friend group and this, brother slash best friend character, and figuring out that they love each other along the way. And I just, this bringing feelings from childhood, or like having one of the characters already be in love before the start of the book, this is just not a trope that I want in my books, and I am realizing this. And sometimes and the other main part of this book was that this like bro code had been broken by Victor being into Ash, and I was just like, who cares? Like, I just, ugh. So I don't know, this book just like didn't really work for me very well. I was frustrated for a lot of it. It definitely is steamy, and there's sexy times in it, but it just wasn't really pushing my buttons the way I wanted it to, so I gave it 2 stars. And the last book that I finished in July for the Tarot Readathon was Any Way the Wind Blows, which is also by Rainbow Rowell and is the 3rd book in the Simon Snow series. This was new at the top of July, and I was really excited to get to it. That's why I reread Wayward Son. And so I've seen some like sort of mixed reviews on this, and I think it's because it's extremely character driven and very like relationship driven, and there's a lot less plot. And taking a step back and looking at the Simon Snow trilogy as a whole, I can really see some issues with the trilogy and how it doesn't work as a trilogy. And so I definitely understand some people's complaints, but for me, I gushed about this book, and you can check that out in the Tarot Readathon wrap-up video, because for me, I was like, they spent literally 200 pages of just like talking it out, and I was like loving it. So I really enjoyed Any Way the Wind Blows, and gave it like, I would definitely give it like a solid 4.5 stars. So after the Tarot Readathon finished, I had basically the whole last week of July in which I did not read almost anything. I don't know if I was just like a smidgen reading out, but I was listening to podcasts and stuff at work, and I did start picked up an audiobook I'd read in the past, but I didn't finish it. So the only thing that I had left to finish in July that I have to talk about is Yona of the Dawn. This is a manga, and I read volume 1. The author is Mizuho Kusanagi. Probably butchered that, sorry. But it's very short because I just read volume 1, and this is about it seems to be like 3 main characters, Yona and Hak and Suwon, and there's like betrayal and there's murder and there's love all happening in this one volume, and it's a very dramatic, strong start to this series. And I was I already got out the next volume out from the library, so I am definitely excited to start this. I don't have very much manga experience. What I read was enjoyable and pulled me along for sure. I don't feel like I can it's hard to like rate this as a story because it just very clearly is volume 1. It's the like opening chapters of this story, and it's a setup. So like as its own arc, we're still on the upward trajectory of this arc. It's not its own complete volume, so how can I rate that? But I am enjoying it a lot, so if I had to rate it, I'd give it like a solid 4 stars. So overall, it's a good month. I had 6 audiobooks and 6 digital books for a total of 12 finished books, total of 3,598 pages, average rating of the month of 3.5, which is good and positive overall. So I'm very pleased with my July wrap up and everything I read. If you read any of these books, leave a comment down below on your thoughts, and if you also participated in the Tarot Readathon, let me know about that so I can, talk with you about that, because I had a really great time. Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into August because there's a lot of readathons that I have planned. Check out my August TBR video that's already live, and thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye!
Been denied.
Sweet Caroline.
Bah, bah, bah.
Well, that's a blooper now.
Good. Love you. I'll leave you alone.
Love you too. Better hurry this up. Losing my light.
Careful, you don't get copyright stricken.
Yeah, because we're gonna get copy stricken because that was just so perfectly on key and everything. Absolutely flawless performance. Neil Diamond himself was right here in my guest room. Okay.